Don't introduce yourself tonight. Just stand near the back." The wineglass in Dale's hand never reached his mouth. It hung there, 3 inches off, while 40 people at his retirement dinner waited for the rest of the joke. There wasn't one. He smiled at me the way you smile at a child who has wandered into the adults' table. My little sister Carol looked at her plate. She had been looking at her plate for 2 years, and I had let myself believe that was just who she'd become. I wish I could tell you his words slid right off me. They didn't. My left knee went stiff the way it does before a cold front moves in, the old way, the deployment way, the way it learned in places I never talk about at dinner parties. 31 years in uniform, and the body still files the weather before the mind catches up. Nobody in that ballroom in Asheville knew what I'd done for a living. Dale least of all. To him, I was the quiet sister-in-law who grew tomatoes and drove a 12-year-old truck. He had spent 8 years deciding I didn't matter, and he was about to find out who in that room already knew otherwise. But to understand the look that crossed his face an hour later, and why a gray-haired man none of them recognized would rise from table 9 and ask the room to be quiet, you have to go back, not to the dinner. To a text message that came in at 8:43 on a Tuesday night, 11 words long, that told me my sister was finally ready to be found. I retired from the Army at 54. Colonel, though I almost never say the word out loud. 31 years, and the last 11 of them I spent doing work most people don't picture when they picture a soldier. No rifle. A telephone, mostly. A folding chair in too many kitchens. I ran family readiness for a brigade, which is a tidy phrase for sitting with a woman at 2 in the morning while she decides whether her marriage is dangerous or just unhappy, and helping her tell the difference. I sat with the ones whose husbands came back from deployments wrong. I sat with the ones whose husbands had always been wrong, and used the deployments to hide it. I learned to read a kitchen the way other people read a face. I tell you this because it matters later. It is the only reason I knew what I was looking at. After I hung up the uniform, I bought a small house outside Asheville, North Carolina, up where the road turns to gravel, and the fog sits in the hollow until almost 10 in the morning. The porch needed paint. The gutters needed cleaning. There was a dogwood in the side yard that bloomed 2 weeks later than every other dogwood on the mountain, stubborn thing, and I loved it for that. I kept bees badly. I grew tomatoes. Well, on Sundays I drove down to the Methodist church and brought a peach cobbler nobody had asked for, and the women there knew me as Maggie, the widow who was handy with a ladder. They did not know I had briefed a 2-star general the week before I put in my papers. I preferred it that way. The Army had taken enough years. It did not need to follow me up the mountain and into every conversation. My sister Carol lived 40 minutes down the valley, in a development with a fountain at the entrance and rules about the color of your front door. She was 4 years younger than me, and she had always been the soft one. When we were girls in Ohio, I climbed the water tower behind the feed store on a dare and got grounded for a month. Carol cried at the bottom and begged me to come down. That was the 2 of us, in one sentence. I went looking for the edge of things. She stood at the bottom and worried about the people who did. She became a school librarian. Of course she did. She could find any book a child half described, the one with the blue cover and the dog that dies, and she'd have it in their hands inside a minute. She read to the kindergartners in voices. She remembered every birthday. After our mother passed, it was Carol who drove out and cleaned the house, and Carol who kept the recipe box, and Carol who called me every single Sunday for 9 years without missing one. Then the Sundays got thin. That was the first thing, though I didn't see it as a thing at the time. You never do. She married Dale Hargrove 8 years before that retirement dinner. I want to be fair to the man, or at least accurate, because accuracy is the only kind of fairness that's worth anything. Dale was likable. People liked him on purpose and people liked him by accident. He had a big laugh and a firm handshake, and he remembered the name of your dog. He sold commercial insurance and he was good at it. And at the cookouts, in those early years, he was the one flipping the burgers and telling the story that made the whole patio go quiet and then roar. The first time I met him I thought, good. She found a warm one. Charm is not warmth. It took me too long to learn the difference and I'd had training. The first thing I noticed about 3 years in, and even then I talked myself out of it. We were at their house for Easter. I asked Carol where she wanted to go for her birthday that year. Somewhere just the 2 of us, A sister's weekend like we used to do. And before she answered, she looked at Dale. Just a glance. A quarter of a second. The kind of look you don't even know you're doing. He was across the room, not even part of the conversation, and her eyes went to him first to see what her own answer was allowed to be. I had seen that glance before, in kitchens. At 2 a.m, I told myself I was reading A Stranger's Marriage through a soldier's bad habits. I told myself Carol was a grown woman who could speak for herself. I told myself a lot of things over the next few years, and every one of them was a way of not driving down the valley and asking the only question that mattered. The glances became a pattern, and the pattern became the weather of their house. I'd ask Carol a question and watch her route it through Dale before she answered. Where do you two want to eat? What did you think of the movie? Are you coming for Thanksgiving? He answered for her, smoothly, with a hand on her shoulder, and she let him. And the worst part was how natural they had both made it look. Like a dance they'd practiced, until the steps disappeared. One afternoon, on their back deck, with Carol inside fixing iced tea, Dale leaned toward me, with a beer sweating in his hand, and said, friendly as Sunday, "You know, Maggie, I've never been able to figure out what it is you actually did all those years. Carol says government. I always pictured you behind a desk somewhere, stamping things." I smiled. Something like that. No offense. He grinned. You've just always had that, I don't know. That relaxed quality. Carol's the engine in this family. She's the one who keeps it all running. He said it like a compliment to her. It wasn't. It was a property line. He was telling me which of us he'd decided counted. And he was doing it on his own deck with a smile. Which is the only place men like Dale ever do their real work. I'd spent the better part of a decade teaching young sergeants how to spot it. The compliment that fences someone in. She's so dependable. She's the strong one. She doesn't need much. Every one of those is a leash with a bow on it. That's one way to see it, I said, and let him think he'd won the exchange. Because the deck was his and the tea was almost ready, and there was nothing to be won that afternoon anyway. Over the next 2 years, the comments got smaller and meaner, which is how you know they're working. Carol's no good with money, leave that to me. Carol gets confused. Carol worries too much. Don't mind her. He said these things in front of her lightly, and she absorbed them the way you absorb a dripping faucet by stopping hearing it. And the parts of her that I'd loved most started going quiet, one at a time, like someone walking through a house turning off lamps. She quit the book club. Dale thought those women were a bad influence, gossips, he said. She stopped driving out to see me on her own. Theirs was always a reason. The car, the weather, a thing Dale needed. She stopped posting the little photos she used to post. The library displays she built with construction paper and too much glitter. Her world got smaller and smaller, and she narrated none of it. Because the genius of the thing is that it never happens on any single day you could point to. There is no Tuesday you can name. There is just a woman who used to call every Sunday and then didn't. I want to stop here and say something plainly, because it is the spine of everything that comes after, and because somebody watching this needs to hear it said out loud by someone who spent a career learning it the hard way. What was happening to my sister has a name. It took the law a long time to catch up to it, and in most of this country, the law still hasn't, fully. It's called coercive control. It is not the black eye. It is not the thing that leaves a mark a doctor can chart. It is the slow, patient, deliberate work of making another person smaller, of moving the walls of their life in an inch at a time until they can't turn around, until they check a man's face before they answer a simple question about their own birthday. Isolation from the people who love you. Control of the money. Monitoring where you go and who you talk to. The steady erosion of a person until the person agrees, somewhere deep down, that they were never worth much to begin with. A handful of states have started writing it into law. California and Connecticut among the first, mostly in the family courts. Where a judge deciding custody or a protective order can now name a pattern instead of waiting for a bruise. Most states haven't. The point I want to plant in you, the thing I wish I had let myself believe 2 years sooner, is this. The absence of a bruise is not the absence of harm. Sometimes it's just better hidden harm. Sometimes the most dangerous house on the street is the one where nobody's ever called the police. Because the man in it never had to raise his hand. He'd found something quieter that worked just as well. I knew all of that. I'd taught it. And I still drove past the exit to her development a dozen times telling myself it wasn't my marriage to fix. Then came the wrist. It was a Saturday in the fall, and I'd come down to help them clear the garage, the kind of chore that gives sisters a few unsupervised hours. And as Carol reached up to pull a box off a high shelf, her sleeve slid back and I saw it. A band of yellow-green around her wrist, the exact width of a hand. The color a bruise goes on its way out, 4 or 5 days old. She caught me, looking, and the sleeve came down so fast it was almost a flinch. "Caught it on the car door," she said. "Quick, smooth. A line with the corners already worn off from use." I'd heard 10,000 versions of that sentence. I knew better than to chase it. You push a frightened person, and they don't run to you. They run from you, deeper into the thing that's hurting them. Because at least the thing that's hurting them is familiar. So I didn't push. I said, "Those car doors. I swear." And I changed the subject, and I drove home that night gripping my own steering wheel so hard my knuckles ached, and I made myself a promise on the dark road that I would not look away again. But I want to be honest about what I did next. Because it's the part people skip when they tell stories like this, and the skipping is what makes the stories useless. I did not call her. I did not call the police. I did not drive back down and pound on the door. I waited. For 6 more weeks I waited and I watched, and I made my Sunday calls land soft and easy so that nothing about me would ever read to Dale as a threat. Because the one thing I knew with total certainty, the one piece of hard-won knowledge I'd have bet my pension on, is that the most dangerous moment in a controlled person's life is the moment they try to leave. That's when it escalates. That's when the man who never raised his hand decides the rules have changed. I was not going to kick that door open and walk away and leave her inside it. When we moved, we were going to move once, all the way, and we were going to be ready. So I built the patience back into myself like a muscle I'd let go soft. And I waited for Carol to tell me she was ready, in whatever language she could still safely use. She told me at 8:43 on a Tuesday night. I was at the sink, rinsing a coffee cup, when the phone lit up on the counter. A text from Carol. And when I read it, the cup went still under the water, and the kitchen got very quiet. And the old cold settled into my left knee even though the night was warm. "Still reading that book about the lighthouse keeper. Can't put it down." That was all. 11 words. To anyone else, the sister sharing what she was reading, which is the most ordinary thing in the world for a librarian to text. To me, it was a flare fired into the dark. Here is the thing about secret signals between sisters, and I want to be clear about it, because the truth is less dramatic and more useful than the version people imagine. We didn't have a spy's code book. We had a book. One real book, The Light Between the Pages, a quiet little novel about a lighthouse keeper's wife, that I'd given Carol the last Christmas before she got married. There's a scene in it where the wife, who can't speak freely in front of her husband, signals her sister across a crowded room by mentioning a book they both know. Carol and I had laughed about it at the time. And somewhere in there, half as a joke, the way sisters do, we'd made a pact. If you ever need me and you can't say so, tell me you're reading it. Tell me you can't put it down. For years it was nothing. A private joke that lived in a drawer. The beauty of it, the reason it could survive 2 years of a man reading her phone over her shoulder, was that it didn't look like anything. He could have read that text out loud at the dinner table and heard nothing in it, but his wife talking about a book. There was no code to crack because there was no code. There was only a sister, and a story we both knew, and the trust that I would hear what wasn't being said. I heard it. I set the cup in the rack. I dried my hands. And then I did not do any of the things a frightened person does. I did not call her, because if he was in the room, a call would put her in more danger than she was already in. I did not get in the truck, not yet, because you don't drive into a situation you haven't read. 31 years had taught me one rule above all the others, and it had kept better people than me alive. Never move faster than your information. I sat down at my kitchen table with a legal pad and a pen, the same as I'd done 100 times in 100 other kitchens, and I started to write down everything I knew. 8:43, the text said at the top of my pad. Then I started filling in the page underneath it, and the filling in is what told me how bad things were, because the page was mostly blank. 3 years ago, I could have written a column of our conversations a yard long. Now I sat there and tried to remember the last time Carol and I had talked for more than 10 minutes, the last time she'd called me instead of the other way around, the last time I'd heard her laugh on the phone, the real laugh, the one that cracks in the middle. I couldn't find it. There was a hollow where 2 years of my sister should have been, And I had let it stay hollow because filling it would have meant admitting what the emptiness meant. I made a list of facts, not feelings. Facts hold still while you look at them. Feelings move around and lie. Fact. She no longer drove anywhere alone. Fact. Every recent plan we'd made had been cancelled by Dale, never by Carol. Fact. The wrist. Fact. 6 weeks since I'd seen her in person. Fact. A text tonight in the one language we'd agreed meant trouble. Then I made one phone call. Not to her. To a woman named Brenda Pruitt, who lived 2 doors down from Carol and Dale, and had been a labor and delivery nurse for 30 years before her knees retired her early. Nurses see things. They're trained to notice the thing the patient isn't saying, and they don't lose the habit when they hang up the scrubs. I'd met Brenda twice at cookouts, and I'd liked her plain way of talking. She picked up on the 3rd ring. "Maggie, everything all right?" "I'm not sure," I said. "I'm going to ask you something strange, and I'd be grateful if you'd just tell me the truth, even if it feels like none of my business." A pause. "Okay, when did you last see Carol? Not Dale, Carol, by herself." The pause this time was longer, and the length of it told me as much as anything she said after. People don't have to think hard about easy answers. "Huh," she said finally. I'm trying to picture it, and I can't. I see Dale getting the mail. I see Dale's car. I haven't seen Carol in the yard since the spring, maybe? She used to weed those front beds every evening. I'd wave. And the house? Anything you've noticed?" Brenda lowered her voice, even though she was in her own kitchen with no one to hear her. "I didn't want to be the nosy neighbor, but there's been some hollering over there. More than there used to be. Always him. You'd hear his voice come right through the wall, and you'd never once hear hers. Like she'd given up answering." She hesitated, and he let the cleaning girl go. The one who came Thursdays. "Carol's got the bad knees, same as me, she needed the help, and a few months back the girl just stopped coming. I asked Dale once, and he said they were cutting back." Cutting back. I wrote it down. A man with a good job in a paid-off house, in a development with a fountain, cutting back specifically on the one expense that gave his wife with the bad knees some independence in her own home. There's a name for that too. It's called narrowing the field. You take away the help, and now she needs you for the things she used to do alone, and need, dressed up as love, is the strongest cage there is. "One more thing," Brenda said, and I could hear her deciding to say it. "A couple months ago, real late, there were lights. Police lights out front. I watched from the window. They were there maybe 20 minutes, and then they left and nothing came of it. I never knew which house, but it was that end of the street. I thanked her. I told her she'd done nothing wrong by telling me, and a great deal of right, and I meant it. Then I hung up and sat with what I had, and what I had was a pattern. And the pattern was the oldest one in the book. Isolate. Take the money, take the car, take the help, take the friends. Cut every line to the outside world one at a time quietly, so that by the time anyone notices, the person inside has no way to call out and nowhere to run to, and worst of all, has half stopped believing she deserves to." I looked at the clock. 9:26. I'd promised myself we'd move once, all the way, when we were ready. We weren't ready yet. A lawyer would take weeks. The money had to be found, the documents copied, a place for her to land arranged. You don't pull someone out of a controlled situation on a Tuesday night with a legal pad and good intentions. That's how people get hurt. But I also wasn't going to sit on my mountain and do nothing while my sister sent up a flare. There's a difference between moving too fast and refusing to move at all, and the space between them is where judgment lives. So I sent one text, not to Carol, to Dale. "Hi Dale, in the area tomorrow running errands, thought I'd swing by and say hi to you both. That work?" I wanted to see 2 things, whether he'd let me in the door, and how fast he'd answer. A man with nothing to hide takes his time. A man watching his wife's phone and his own answers fast. The reply came in under a minute. "We're good, kind of a busy week though, maybe another time." "We're good, not Carol would love that, not she's been wanting to see you. We're good, the royal we, the we that has swallowed the other person whole. And maybe another time, which is the most polite door in the world to have shut in your face." I read it twice. Then I set the phone down and I made my decision. And it was the soldier's decision, not the sister's. I would not go to that house tonight, and I would not be kept from it forever. I would build the thing properly, and then I would take her out in one clean move that didn't give him a Tuesday night's warning. But first, I texted Carol back. One line in the same language she'd used, so that if he was reading it he'd see nothing at all. That's a good one. Read it slow, it's worth it. Talk soon, love you. Read it slow, it's worth it. I'm coming, hold on. I didn't sleep much. I sat on the porch in the dark with my bad knee propped on the railing, and I let the old machinery turn over, the part of me I'd retired and that had never really retired at all. Observe, assess, plan, move. And under all of it, quieter, the part that wasn't a colonel at all, the part that was just a girl at the bottom of a water tower with her heart in her throat, watching her sister climb towards something dangerous. Only this time I was the one who had to climb. The next morning I started building. The first call was to a lawyer, a woman named Patrice Vega, who'd done estate work for me after my husband died, and who, it turned out, had spent 15 years before that in family law. I told her what I knew. She listened without interrupting, which is the most expensive thing a lawyer can do for you. And at the end, she said something I've never forgotten. Here's what you need to understand, Maggie. The law in this state isn't going to do much for what you've described. Not yet. Not unless it gets physical and provable. There's no charge called he made her small. But the leverage isn't in the criminal courts. It's in the divorce. Because the one thing a man like this can't stand to lose is control, and a divorce is the one room where she controls the outcome and he can't follow her in. If she's got proof of the financial games, the hidden accounts, the deception, that's not just grounds. That's a position of strength. So before anybody does anything dramatic, she needs to become the best documented woman in North Carolina. Quietly. Then she walks out the front door with the whole file already in my hands. That was the strategy. Not a confrontation. A foundation. And it lined up exactly with what 31 years had taught me. The confrontation is never the victory. The confrontation is just the moment. The work you already did becomes visible to everyone else. The trick was reaching Carol without reaching her phone, because her phone was Dale's window into her. So we went around it. I started leaving books for her at the library, where she still worked 2 mornings a week. The one end place Dale didn't follow her in, with notes tucked in the back, the way she used to hide notes in books for the kids. She wrote back the same way, in pencil, in the margins, and slid the books into the return slot for me to pick up. It was slow, it was clumsy. A grown woman and a retired colonel, passing secret messages in library books, like a couple of spies who'd watched too many movies. And it worked, because the best plan is almost never the cleverest one. It's the one nobody thinks to watch. Through those margins, over 3 weeks, my sister came back to life in front of me, one penciled line at a time. At first, the handwriting was small and the sentences were apologies. I'm probably overreacting. He's not always like this. I don't want to make trouble. The handwriting of a woman who's been taught her own perceptions can't be trusted, which is the deepest cut of all. Because once they've taken your trust in your own eyes, they don't need locks. You'll stay on your own. I wrote back the only true thing I knew. You are not overreacting. I have done this for a living for 11 years. I know exactly what I am looking at. And you are not making trouble. The trouble is already there. You are just the first one brave enough to write it down. Something shifted after that. The handwriting got bigger. The sentences got sharper. She started telling me things, and the things were worse than I'd let myself imagine. He had her on an allowance, cash, counted out weekly, and she had to account for what she spent. He'd taken her off the joint checking 3 years ago, told her it was simpler for the taxes. She didn't know what they had or what they owed. She'd found by accident, looking for the car title, a bank statement for an account in his name alone with a number on it that made her sit down on the closet floor. She didn't tell me the number yet. She wasn't sure she'd read it right, she said, and there it was again. The conditioned doubt. A woman who'd run a library's entire cataloging system for 15 years, no longer trusting herself to read a number off a page. Find it again, I wrote. Photograph it. Don't trust your memory, trust the picture, and put the picture somewhere he can't reach. Then we'll know. The next book came back with a photograph folded into Chapter 9, a bank statement, an account in Dale Hargrove's name only, a balance of $146,280.17. I sat in my truck in the library parking lot and looked at that number for a long time, not because the amount shocked me, though it did, because of the cents, the 17 cents. This was not a secret rainy day fund a husband had quietly built for the family. This was an account that had been moved through, fed and drawn down, lived for years, while he told his wife with the bad knees that they were cutting back. That the Thursday cleaning girl was too much. That her birthday weekend with her sister wasn't in the budget. The 17 cents was the truth. People round their lies. They never round the real number. I want to say something here about money, because it's the part people underestimate, and underestimating it is exactly how it works. When people picture an abusive marriage, they picture fists. They don't picture a checkbook. But financial control is one of the most common tools there is, and one of the most effective, because it's invisible and it's deniable, and it can be dressed up as responsibility. He's just better with money. He handles the bills. She's no good with that stuff, he says, having spent years making sure she got no practice at it. And the trap it builds is the strongest one going, because the question every person in Carol's position eventually asks themselves, at 3 a.m, is the most practical question in the world. If I leave, where do I sleep? What do I live on? He had made sure she didn't know the answer. He had made sure the answer was him. The money was the cage, which meant the money was also the key. Over the next 2 weeks, Carol photographed everything. She got bolder, and I had to remind her, in pencil, to slow down, because boldness is its own kind of danger when the other person is watching. But she found it all. Statements going back years. A second account she hadn't known about. A line of credit against the house she'd never signed for, or had signed for without being told what it was, in the days when she still signed whatever he put in front of her. The picture that came together was not a man saving for a surprise. It was a man who had spent 8 years quietly, making sure that if his wife ever tried to leave, she'd find the door locked from a direction she couldn't see. And then, near the end, she found the last thing. She almost didn't tell me. It came back in a book with no note at all, just a single hotel receipt photographed and folded small, and underneath it, in pencil, 4 words. I think you know. I did know. Men like Dale almost always have one, because the same thing that makes a man need to own his wife makes him certain the rules don't apply to him. I'll be honest with you about how I felt looking at that receipt, because the honest answer isn't the noble one. I didn't feel sad for Carol. I felt something cold and clear and almost grateful, because it meant the foundation was finished. It was the last brick. Patrice had told me weeks earlier that the financial deception alone would carry the case. The rest of it just made sure the ground would never shift under my sister again. I drove down and met Patrice and Carol together in Patrice's office. On a morning, Dale thought Carol was at the library. It was the first time I'd seen my sister in the flesh in nearly 2 months, and I have to tell you, when she walked in, my knee forgot all about the weather and just about gave out from under me for a different reason entirely. She'd gotten so thin. Not sick thin. Erased thin. Like a pencil drawing somebody had been going over with a kneaded eraser, lightening her year after year until you could almost see through her. But her eyes were not erased. Her eyes were Carol's. The water tower Carol, the one who'd find any book a kid half described. She sat down across from Patrice and she put a flash drive on the desk, hundreds of photographs, the whole architecture of 8 years of control rendered in evidence, and she said in a voice that shook but did not stop, I want to know my options. Patrice looked at the screen for a long while. Then she took off her glasses and she did something I've only ever seen good professionals do. She smiled, a small private smile. The smile of someone who has just realized the facts are even stronger than the client dared to hope. You have a great many options, she said. And he has very few. Let's talk about how you'd like to do this. The how took shape over the following 2 weeks, and it was Carol's plan, not mine. I want that on the record. People will watch this and assume the Colonel ran the operation, and the Colonel did help. The Colonel found the lawyer and carried the worry and made the calls. But the woman who decided how it would end was my little sister, and the decision she made was braver than anything I ever did in uniform. Because here is what Patrice offered her, the clean version. File the papers, have Dale served quietly at his office by a process server on a Wednesday morning. No scene, no audience. The law doing its slow gray work in the daylight. It was the safe play and the smart play, and 99 times out of 100 it's the right one. Never give a controlling man an audience, the textbook says. An audience is the one thing he wants. Carol thought about it for 3 days. And then she came back and she said no. She didn't want revenge. I need you to understand that, because it's the part that matters. She wasn't after the cinematic moment, the gasp, the shattered glass. What she said to me in the truck outside Patrice's office was quieter than that, and it has stayed with me longer than any order I ever gave or received. She said, "For 8 years he told everyone I was the weak one. He told them so many times that I started telling it to myself. And every one of those people believed him, because why wouldn't they? He's so charming," and I just stood there and nodded. "I don't need him on his knees, Maggie. I don't need him to suffer. I just need the people who watched him erase me to watch me walk back in. One time, with my eyes up, and then I never have to see any of them again." That's not revenge. Revenge is about him. What Carol wanted was about her. She wanted to undo, in front of the only witnesses who mattered, the one lie that had done the most damage. The lie that she was small, and there was exactly one stage where all of those witnesses would be gathered in one room. Dale's retirement dinner. He was leaving the insurance firm after 22 years, going out on top. And they were throwing him at the country club, the same club where he'd spent a decade performing the role of the good husband with the dependable wife. 40-some people. His colleagues, his golf partners, the neighbors, the brother-in-law he golfed with, the whole audience that had clapped for his version of the story for 8 years. Carol wanted to give them the ending he hadn't written. The country club ballroom had a chandelier that somebody had paid too much for, and a carpet the color of old wine. There were round tables with white cloths and little place cards in a font that was trying very hard, and a banner over the bar that said "Congratulations Day." 22 years in gold letters. The man himself was holding court near the windows when I came in, exactly where I knew he'd be, the center of the warmest part of the room, telling a story with his hands. I'd been invited, because not inviting me would have looked strange, and Dale was always careful about how things looked. That care was about to cost him everything, though he didn't know it yet. He spotted me across the room and raised his glass and called out, loud enough for the tables nearby, "Maggie! Glad you could make it up off your mountain." A few people chuckled, and then he said the thing I opened this whole story with, half to me and half to his audience, smiling the whole time. "Don't introduce yourself tonight. Just stand near the back." It got a laugh. It was meant to. To everyone listening, it was just Dale ribbing his quiet sister-in-law, telling the wallflower to go be a wallflower, all in good fun. Only Carol, standing near him in a blue dress I'd never seen, looking down at the carpet, knew it for what it was. Only Carol heard the 8 years in it. I smiled back at him. I didn't say a word. I went and stood near the back, exactly as told, because the back was the best seat in the house for what was coming, and because the last thing I was going to do was tip my hand to a man who still thought the most dangerous person in the room was himself. Patrice was already there, in a navy suit, at a table near the door, with a thin leather folder in front of her, and a glass of water she didn't touch. She caught my eye once and gave me nothing. No nod, no flicker, a professional to the last. And at table 9, near the windows, sat a man I'd asked to come. A man most of the room didn't know, gray-haired, straight-backed, in a sport coat that had been good 15 years ago and was still pressed like it mattered. His name was Walter Brennan, and he was the only other person in that ballroom, besides Carol and Patrice, who knew who I actually was. I'll tell you how he came to be there in a moment, because it's the heart of the whole thing. The dinner ran its course. Salads, then chicken, then the speeches. Dale's boss said warm things. A golf partner told a story that was mostly about himself. And then Dale stood up to say his thanks, glass in hand, and the room turned to him the way rooms always turned to Dale. And he was glowing. He was in his element, and he put his free hand on Carol's shoulder and pulled her in against his side. "I couldn't have done any of this," he said, "without this woman right here, my rock. 22 years and she never once made a fuss." Warm laughter. I always tell people, behind every successful man is a wife who knows when to let him work. More laughter. He squeezed her shoulder. "She's not going anywhere." He meant it as a love note. It landed in my chest like a verdict. She's not going anywhere. He believed it completely. That was the whole tragedy and the whole crime of him in one sentence. He genuinely believed she belonged to him, that she was a thing he owned, like the watch on his wrist, and the account with the 17 cents. Carol stood very still under his arm. And then, while the room was still clapping for him, she stepped out from under it. It was a small smobisman. She just took one step sideways and forward, out of the curve of his arm, and turned to face him, and the clapping died in a ragged way as people noticed something was off without knowing what. Patrice rose from her table and crossed the floor, unhurried, the folder in her hand. The room went quiet by sections, like lights going out in a city. Carol's voice was not loud, but it carried because everything else had stopped. "Dale," she said, "I'm leaving you. The papers are in Patrice's hand. You'll be served properly tomorrow, but I wanted to tell you here, in front of these people. Because these are the people you told, over and over, that I was the weak one, and I wanted them to hear me say it isn't true. You could have heard a fork drop. A few people actually set theirs down, the way the old training books say a stunned room does. The whole table, suddenly remembering it was holding silverware." Dale laughed. It was the wrong move, and you could see, even in the half-second it hung there, that some part of him knew it was the wrong move. "Carol," he said, indulgent, performing for the room one more time out of pure reflex. "Honey, you've had some wine. Sit down. We'll talk about this at home." "We won't," she said. "There's no more home to talk about it in. I found the account, Dale. The one with $146,000 in it that you told me we didn't have. I found the line of credit on the house. I found the hotel in Charlotte." Her voice shook on Charlotte, and then steadied, and the steadying was the bravest thing I have ever watched a human being do. "I documented all of it. For weeks. While you thought I was at the library. You always did think I couldn't manage anything on my own." And here's where Dale made his choice. The choice that defined him. The choice that the whole story had been quietly walking toward. A different man, a man with any bottom to him at all, might have gone pale and gone quiet and walked out. Dale did not. Dale doubled down. Because admitting he was wrong was the one thing his whole life had been built to make impossible. His face changed. The charm fell off it like a mask that had never fit as well as he thought. He stepped toward her, and his voice came out low and ugly, not performing anymore. The voice I'd have bet money Carol heard through the walls at night. "You stupid woman," he said. "You think you did this? You couldn't organize a sock drawer. Somebody put you up to this." His eyes swept the room and found me at the back, and his face twisted with a kind of triumphant contempt, because at last he thought he understood. "It was you, wasn't it? The spinster colonel, or whatever you were, coming down off your hill to wreck a marriage you were always jealous of." It was the closest he ever came to the truth, and he didn't even know which part he'd gotten right. I didn't answer him. I didn't have to. Because at table 9, Walter Brennan put both hands flat on the white tablecloth and pushed himself slowly to his feet. I have to back up 9 years to tell you who Walter Brennan is, because the way he came to be standing in that ballroom is the part of this story I'd want you to keep if you forgot all the rest. 9 years ago, when I was still in uniform, still running family readiness for the brigade, a young soldier named Danny Brennan was killed overseas. 23 years old. It was my job, that kind of week, to be the one who showed up. Not the official notification, that's a different team, but the after. The long after. The weeks when the casseroles stop coming, and the rest of the world goes back to its Tuesdays, and a family sits in a house that's suddenly the wrong size. Danny's mother had passed years before. It was just his father, Walter, a retired millwright with bad hands, and a flag he didn't know what to do with. I sat with Walter Brennan a lot of evenings that year. I didn't have any words that helped, because there aren't any, and the worst thing you can do is pretend there are. So mostly I just came. I fixed his porch step because it was loose, and it gave me something to do with my hands while he talked. I drove him to the appointments. I sat at his kitchen table while he told me the same 3 stories about Danny over and over, because telling them was how he kept the boy in the room a little longer, and the kindest thing I could do was act like I'd never heard them. Most commanders, the good ones even, they send the paperwork and they mean well, and they move on. Because they have to, because there's always another family. I don't say that to make myself sound like a saint. I stayed because I couldn't figure out how to leave, and that's a different thing than virtue. But I stayed. I hadn't seen Walter in 6 years. We'd traded Christmas cards. Ciao. When I started building the foundation under Carol, I wasn't thinking about him at all. It was Patrice, of all people, who turned out to know him. His late wife had been a client of hers decades back, and when I mentioned in passing that I'd once done casualty and family work in the Army, Patrice said, "You know who thinks the world of you. Walter Brennan. He's mentioned you for years." I called him. I told him only that my sister was getting out of a bad marriage, and that there'd be a difficult evening, and that it would mean something to me to have one steady person in the room who knew my measure. I did not ask him to do what he did. I want to be clear about that. I asked him to come and sit at table 9 and just be there. The rest was his. So when Dale spat the word spinster colonel across that ballroom, sneering it, using 31 years of my life as an insult to wound my sister with, Walter Brennan stood up. And the room, which had been fixed on Dale and Carol, turned to look at the gray-haired stranger getting to his feet at table 9. "Excuse me," Walter said. His voice wasn't strong anymore, but quiet carries in a quiet room. "I don't know most of you, and I'm sorry to interrupt the man's party, but I can't sit here and listen to that." He looked at Dale. Then he looked for a long moment at me, and I felt my throat close, because I knew what was coming and there was no stopping it and no part of me had earned it. "That woman in the back," Walter said, "is Colonel Margaret Doyle. I expect she'll be unhappy with me for saying so, because in 9 years I've never once heard her say it about herself." A few people had turned all the way around in their chairs. "Now, my boy Danny was killed overseas 9 years ago. And this lady, who none of you apparently thought worth introducing tonight, she sat in my kitchen 2 and 3 nights a week for the better part of a year, so that I wouldn't have to be alone in it. She fixed my porch step. She drove me to the VA when I couldn't see the road through my own eyes. The United States Army sent me a folded flag and a great deal of paperwork. It sent me exactly one human being. And she is standing at the back of this room because the man of the hour told her to." The silence in that ballroom changed temperature. You could feel it. It went from the silence of people watching a marriage end to the silence of people realizing they had badly misjudged something, and that they'd done it for years, comfortably, on the word of the charming man holding the glass. "I came tonight as a favor to her," Walter said, "and I didn't know what any of this was about, but I know what I know. So I'll just say it and sit down. In my experience, the people who spend their whole lives telling you how strong they are usually aren't. And the ones who never mention it usually are. That's all." He looked at Carol. "Ma'am, your sister is the realest person I ever met. I expect you take after her more than you've been allowed to know." And he sat down. I have stood in formations and heard generals speak. I have never in my life heard anything land in a room the way that old man's plain words landed in that one. Dale's face had gone the color of the tablecloth. Not because he'd been beaten in an argument, he hadn't even been in one. Because the foundation under the only thing he'd ever really had, the room's belief in his version of events, had just dropped out from under him in front of everyone he'd spent 22 years performing for. The charming man's only real possession is the audience, and his audience had just turned, all at once, the way a flock of birds, and he could feel it go. He looked around for one ally. There wasn't one. His boss was studying his own plate. His golf partner had angled his chair away. The neighbors were looking at Carol now, at thin, erased Carol standing up straight in her blue dress, and you could see them reassembling 8 years of small moments into a different shape. The canceled dinners, the wife who never spoke, the husband who answered for her, and arriving late and all together, at the truth. Dale did the only thing left to a man like Dale. He got loud. "This is insane," he said. "All of you, she's lying, this is some kind of setup." His voice climbed and cracked, and the more it climbed the smaller he got. Because a desperate man is the easiest thing in the world to see clearly once you've started looking. "Carol, we are going home. Right now." And my sister, who had checked his face before answering a question about her own birthday, who had texted me about a lighthouse keeper, because she couldn't text me the truth, who had been going over with an eraser for 8 years, looked her husband dead in the eye in front of everyone he owned, and said 5 words. "I'm already gone, Dale." Then she picked up her purse from the table, and she walked the length of that wine-colored carpet with her chin level and her eyes up. Past the people who'd believed him, past the banner with the gold letters, and out the door Patrice was holding open. She didn't hurry. She didn't look back. I have replayed that walk 1,000 times, and the thing I keep is that she didn't look back, not even once, not even at me. I followed her out. At the door I stopped and turned around. Just for a second, the way you check a room before you leave it. Dale was standing alone in the middle of the floor, in the middle of his own party, under his own banner, holding his glass, and not one person in that room was looking at him anymore. They were looking at the door my sister had just walked through. That was the last time I ever saw him. The divorce took 7 months. Less than I feared, more than Carol wanted, which Patrice said is how you know it was done right. There was no drama in it, And I want to be honest about that, because the movies lie to you about this part. After the country club, you might expect some final showdown, a courtroom scene, a moment where Dale breaks. There wasn't one. What there was, instead, was paperwork. Facts. The 17 cents and everything around it, laid out in cold columns that no amount of charm could talk its way out of. The hidden account, the line of credit she'd been put on without understanding, the years of deception, all of it documented by the woman he'd spent 8 years insisting couldn't manage a sock drawer. Patrice didn't have to raise her voice once. The facts did the work, the way facts do, slowly and without mercy, and without caring in the slightest how likable the man across the table was. Dale fought it, of course. Men like Dale always fight. Not because they think they'll win, but because surrendering means admitting. And admitting is the one thing they've built their whole self to never do. He told anyone who'd listen that he was the real victim. That Carol had been disloyal, that I'd manipulated a fragile woman into blowing up a good marriage. Some people believed him for a while, fewer than he hoped. The thing about a man whose only currency is the audience's belief is that once the audience has seen behind the currency is worthless, and you can't ever earn it back, no matter how charming you are at the next party. He kept the firm's respect for about a month. The neighbors. Less. The golf foursome quietly became a threesome. He never apologized. I need to tell you that plainly because I think you might be waiting for it, the way I half waited for it myself for a while, out of an old human habit of wanting the story to round itself off. He never called Carol to say he was sorry. He never admitted to her or to anyone that he'd done a single thing wrong. In his telling, right up to the end, he was a good man undone by an ungrateful wife and her meddling sister. Some people never get the reckoning. They just double down until the doubling down is all that's left of them. Alone in the middle of a room with a glass in their hand. But here's the thing I've come to understand, and it's the reason I no longer lose any sleep over the apology that never came. The accountability arrived anyway. It didn't need his cooperation. He lost the money he'd hidden, half of it, by law, to the woman he'd hidden it from. He lost the house. He lost the easy respect that had let him move through the world getting the benefit of every doubt. He lost the audience. None of it was cinematic. All of it was real, and slow and exactly proportional, and it landed on him whether he ever admitted to a thing or not. Consequences don't require a confession. That's the part that sets you free, if you let it. You can stop waiting for the bad man to agree that he was bad. The bill comes due in its own time, in its own quiet way, signed or unsigned. Carol moved into a small apartment on the other side of Asheville, 2 rooms and a galley kitchen, and a window that caught the morning light. The first time I helped her carry boxes up, she stopped in the doorway with a lamp in her arms and just stood there, and I thought something was wrong. And then I realized she was crying, and I realized why. She was looking at the deadbolt, a plain brass deadbolt on a plain apartment door. She set the lamp down and she turned it, locked, unlocked, locked again, and she said, not to me really, more to herself, I can lock my own door. And nobody can ask me why. I had to go stand by the window for a minute after that. The small things came back first. That's how it goes, I've learned. Not the big triumphant things, the small ones. She bought groceries without counting out cash from an envelope and accounting for it later. She drove. Lord, she drove everywhere for no reason, just to feel the wheel in her hands and the road going by, the way she had as a girl. She called me on a Sunday, unprompted, and we talked for an hour and 10 minutes, and somewhere in the middle of it she laughed. The real one, the one that cracks in the middle, and I had to grip the phone a little because I hadn't heard it in 3 years, and I'd been afraid it was gone for good. She went back to the library full-time. Within a year, she was running their adult literacy program, teaching grown men and women to read, people who'd spent their whole lives hiding the one thing they couldn't do. And if you want to know why that work suits her so well, it's because she knows exactly what it is to be made to feel small for something that was never your fault. And she knows exactly how it feels when somebody finally looks at you like you're capable. She gives people that look now. She has a lot of it stored up. It was kept from her for 8 years, and she spends it freely. We don't talk about Dale much. He's not the point. And I think the not talking is part of how she knows she's free. You're not free when you've won the argument with someone. You're free when you stop having the argument in your head at all. But there's one conversation. We did have, a few months after the divorce was final, sitting on her little balcony with the morning light coming up over the buildings. That, I'll give you, because it's the closest thing this story has to a lesson, and I'd rather she said it than me. She asked me when I'd known. I told her the truth that I'd suspected for years, and her face fell, and she said, "Then why didn't you say something sooner?" I'd been dreading that question, and I'd decided long before that I'd answer it straight. "Because you weren't ready," I said. "And if I'd kicked the door in before you were, I'd have made it worse. The most dangerous time for someone in your position is the moment they try to leave." I wasn't going to risk you, to make myself feel like I was doing something. She was quiet for a while. Then she said the thing that I think about most. "I keep feeling like I should be ashamed, that I let it happen. That I'm a grown woman, and I let a man turn me into that. Everyone's going to think I was weak." And I told her what I'd told a dozen other people in a dozen other kitchens, and what I believed down to the floor of myself. "Carol, walking toward the danger isn't the only kind of brave, and it isn't even the hard kind. Any fool can be brave for 30 seconds when the adrenaline's up. I've watched it. I've done it. The hard kind is what you did. The hard kind is living inside the thing for 2 years with your nerve worn down to a thread, and finding, somewhere in there, enough of yourself left to pick up a phone and text your sister about a book. That's not weakness recovering. That's strength that never actually left, just got buried, and dug itself back out an inch at a time. Don't you dare call that weak. I've given medals to people who did less." She didn't say anything. She just reached over and held my hand on the arm of the chair, and we watched the light come all the way up over the city. 2 sisters, older now, one of us finally home. People ask me sometimes, the few who know the story, what the most important thing I learned in 31 years was. They expect me to say something about leadership, or courage under fire, or discipline. Those all matter. But it isn't any of those. The most important thing I learned is that the loudest cries for help don't make a sound. The real ones come in quietly, folded into something ordinary. A text about a book. A sister who used to call every Sunday and then didn't. A woman who checks her husband's face before she answers a question about her own birthday. The world is full of people sending up flares so quiet you have to already be watching to see them. And the only thing any of us can really do for each other is keep watching. Pay attention to the lamps going out, one at a time, in the houses of the people we love. Notice the silence where a voice used to be. My sister sent up a flare 11 words long, about a lighthouse keeper, on a Tuesday night. I almost talked myself out of seeing it, the way I'd talked myself out of it for 2 years. I'm so glad. I was finally watching. If this story meant something to you, share it with someone who might need the reminder that the quietest person at the back of the room is sometimes the strongest one in it, and that the people who never tell you how much they carry are usually carrying the most. Because respect, the real kind, the kind you would give a person before you have any idea what they've done, has a way of coming back around when it's needed most. A note before you go. The things in this story, the slow isolation, the hidden accounts, the financial leash, have a name, coercive control, and they happen in quiet houses on nice streets more often than we'd like to believe. A few states, California and Connecticut among the first, have begun writing it into their family laws, so a judge can name a pattern of control without waiting for a bruise. Most states haven't yet, and where you live changes what's possible. So if anything here made you think about your own home, don't act on what you heard from a stranger telling a story. Sit down with a licensed attorney or a trained advocate who knows the law where you live. In the United States, the National Domestic Violence Hotline is open every hour of every day at 1-800-799-7233. I am not a lawyer, and nothing here is legal advice. I'm just someone who spent years at kitchen tables, learning that the absence of a mark is not the absence of harm. When someone you love goes quiet, go find out why.